Flight controllers, go for landing. Retro. Go, I don't go. Guide, go. GNC, go. Econ, go. Control, go.
Ninth Planet Audio.
Capcom, we're go for landing.
In the late 80s, early 90s, they changed the yearbbook from the highways
back to Rebel.
to
87.
the Rebel.
And the first page in color says, "Go Rebels." There's a Confederate flag. I love the Rebels. People holding the sign that says Rebels. We're back at the Burlington branch of the Boone County Library, looking through my high school's yearbooks from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Wild. Okay, I'm seeing a black kid with a high top. I love that. Okay, the cool thing is, like, you do start to see, like, one black person every now and then. Tim Travis. Oh, he's allowed to sit next to a blonde white girl. This is crazy. Open a yearbook and they tell you stories. Stories of hairstyles so big in the 1980s and of fads that come and go over the years. Stories of the dreams that everyone has as they prepare to exit the liminal space between childhood and adulthood. It's all there in the pages of the Boone County High School yearbooks, as innocent and hilarious as any yearbook on the planet. But these tell you another story too. I want to look at 1990 and the Confederate flags on the front. Yeah, they have Boone County apparel with the Confederate flag on it that they're selling in the Spirit Shop, and this is 1990. These yearbooks tell a story of decades of Confederate imagery, of the stars and bars flying over football games held by cheerleaders sold in the Spirit Shop. They tell the story of a short-lived Confederate character in the 1970s named Buford Bugler, who was there until he wasn't. They tell the story of, and I'm not kidding here, Slave Day, which was heralded in the 1983 yearbook with the headline 13th Amendment Repealed, where, and I quote, "Senior football players and cheerleaders sold themselves as slaves to the highest bidder, in the interest of school spirit." Slave Day lasts 2 years, then it's wiped from history. The same thing happens with the Confederate flag, ubiquitous on page after page in the yearbook until suddenly it's gone in 1992 without any mention, just erased. And these yearbooks tell the story of the emergence of Mr. Rebel. Introduced in 1993, a big foam-headed Confederate general who becomes the dominant symbol of the school, replacing the Confederate flag with his own giant mustached likeness. Okay, here we go. School pride gets 2 thumbs up from me. Mime's the Rebel Man. To VCHS fans. So is that his name? Like, are we supposed to believe he was Rebel Man? I thought he was supposed to be Mr. Rebel. This is 95? Okay, so 1995, he's Rebel Man at first. 1998, the cover is Mr. Rebel. Mr. Rebel is on actually every single page of this. So, like, it's called the 1998 Rebel. Rebels set the record straight. So, Rebels. It's just like, this is clearly like when they were selling Mr. Rebel as a brand. Seems Mr. Rebel stretching with the students. Okay. Like,
that's what you're so. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. Like, what's he do? Like, people say I have too much free time to be working on this, but it seems like this man had nothing but time. And just to remind you of his rise and fall, after a decade of being Mr. Rebel, the man inside the suit retires, and the mascot lays dormant for a few years until he reemerges and creates My Villain Origin Story in 2005. Mr. Rebel 2.0 dominates the school and its yearbooks again until his ultimate retirement in 2017. I mean, he's gone, and then they just kind of move on. It's kind of great. He's nowhere now. As I turn the pages, they're like, and goodbye. When you look back at all of it, paging through decade after decade in one sitting, you see a pattern emerge. You see the Confederate flag everywhere until it's nowhere. You see Slave Day celebrated and then completely erased. You see Mr. Rebel storm the stage until eventually he's gone too. In that way, these yearbooks tell one more story. A history of half measures, of trying and failing to overcome the racism that lies at the core of the name Rebels by removing parts of it, hateful bit by hateful bit, until finally, only the Rebel name remains.
I was a lady rebel. Like, what does that even mean?
The Boone County Rebels will stay the Boone County Rebels with the image of...
It's right here in black and white in print. They might.
Bigger than a flag or mascot.
Anytime you're trying to mess with tradition, you have to be ready for serious backlash.
From Ninth Planet Audio, I'm Akilah Hughes, and this is Rebel Spirit, Episode 3, Half Measures.
My sophomore year,
there was this sort of like shift where they said, no more rebel flags. That's not good. We're going to introduce this.
Wait, so this is 1992?
Yeah.
Ish. Okay, so like Rodney King era.
Yes.
For like a broader understanding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is Jenna Van Lanningham, class of 1994. Jenna was a student at exactly the moment that the Confederate flags were packed up once and for all, and Mr. Rebel was rolled in.
And I went to Boone County High School starting in 1991. My freshman year, I remember rebel flags like being at football games. Mm-hmm. I actually was involved in sports, and we had things with rebel flags on them, sort of not really knowing or understanding what that meant at all at age 13, 14, 15.
Right.
But, the adults in the room said, this is not great. We can't have it at sporting events or at school anymore.
It's hard to emphasize just how abrupt the shift away from the Confederate flag at BCHS is. It's on the cover of yearbooks. It's featured in those arty montage pages. The cheerleaders hold it up. The color guard waves it. People buy little flags to wave at games. The Confederate flag was everywhere, the overarching symbol of the school. And suddenly, what had been the centerpiece of school spirit for 30 years was gone. Something had to fill the void, especially because right then, all eyes were on Boone County's football team.
And of course, we had this really awesome football team at the time with Sean on it.
She's talking about NFL legend Sean Alexander.
And we were just beating teams from Lexington and Louisville 45-7. We kind of during the course of that, I think I remember going to a pep rally at the football stadium, and Mr. Rebel was introduced. Somebody had bought the costume and donated to the school, I believe, and somebody was in it, and there he was, clearly a Confederate colonel or something.
When he comes out, is there excitement? Do you feel like people are yes? Or did anybody recognize we don't have Confederate flags anymore? What is this man doing here?
No, I think there's excitement.
Local Florence businessman H.B. Dethridge, really, that's his name, Dethridge was the man both behind and inside the suit. According to an interview with the Cincinnati Enquirer in 2000, he said he bought the suit because, quote, before we had the Confederate flag, and I wanted to get that out of the school. Mr. Rebel was brought out for school spirit and for something for the kids to rally around. Which, okay, it could have been a tiger or a penguin or a biscuit or literally anything else, but it was a Confederate general. Go figure. This isn't the last time you'll hear the improbable name Dethridge in this story. When I wrote my article about changing the mascot back in 2015, it was HB's wife, Judy, who emerged as Mr. Rebel's staunchest and most vocal defender in a letter she wrote to the Enquirer, which begins, "How can a supposedly reputable newspaper print something so profoundly incorrect without checking facts? The forum piece from Akilah Hughes is absolutely full of misinformation and outright lies. I'm a graduate of Boone County High School and also taught there for 15 years, beginning in the late 1980s. My husband was the original Mr. Rebel. While there were Confederate flags being used at the school in the 1970s and 1980s, he was instrumental in getting the Confederate flag removed from the school, resulting in no backlash and replacing it with the blue Rebel flag. During school events, both Mr. Rebel and the administration confiscated Confederate symbols from students. Mr. Rebel never posed in front of a Confederate flag. My husband fashioned the Mr. Rebel mascot from the one at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in 1990. We'll continue Judy's letter in just a little bit. Trust me, it gets worse. But let's just make one thing perfectly clear here. Removing the iconography of the Confederacy is laudable. The Rebel flag has no place in a high school or anywhere else outside of a museum. But they replaced the red and blue stars and bars with a blue and silver version, the same flag, just different colors. And they brought in a Confederate general to rally behind. And then there's the band. Wow. The band has the Confederate stars and the bars on their little uniforms that year.
And they're wearing Confederate general hats.
Yep, and it looks like there's little Confederate flags on the hats. What's going on? That looks like Confederate marching band, for the Civil War. The Rebel Brigade.
When I was in high school, I remember most just being in the marching band, which was called the Rebel Brigade. Just get right into it.
Yeah, let's be clear, it's right in there.
That is a literal chapter of the KKK, the Rebel Brigade.
Do you think it's a coincidence that they named it that?
Oh gosh, I don't even want to guess.
This is Spencer Zimbrot, class of 2011. The reality is probably not.
I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but, when you have a Confederate general, a different Confederate general on a, reared back horse with a sword thrust in the air. Come on. So they changed it shortly after I left to the Marching Rebels.
Got it.
Which really isn't that much better at all.
It's still not. Spencer's love of music led him away from Florence. He went to Louisville to study music and then to New York for a graduate degree in orchestral conducting. But he came home. He's now the artistic director of the Cincinnati Men's Chorus and teaches music lessons right here in Florence.
How did we get from calling it James Dean to it being a Confederate general?
Right.
It makes no sense. It doesn't hold water.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that they keep trying to argue this is just, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
These are supposed to be academics.
Yes. But we're not just talking with Spencer because he's a Boone County alum. We're talking with Spencer because he's tried what we're trying. 4 years ago, in 2020, he started a petition to get the Rebels' name changed at Boone County once and for all.
A big part of it was the times, and it was all this stuff that was swirling around us.
For anyone who forgot what 2020 was like, we were in a pandemic. Donald Trump was still president. It was an election year. The dual murders by police of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, killed just 90 miles away in Louisville, set off the largest racial protest since the Civil Rights Movement.
And it was, tangible.
Yeah.
But then a big part of it actually was also you and that article that you had written about 5 years before. And I just remember I looking at the date of it, I must have just been graduating from Louisville at that time. And it just had this big impact where I was like, oh my gosh, everything she's saying is spot on. Yeah. It's right. I remember something similar to your experiences happening. And it's just time. Yeah. It's been 5 years since she wrote that. I remember what the community was saying when she wrote it online and everything. It was very contentious. And we're 5 years down the road. Clearly there's impetus to change. Yes. Let's piggyback off of that.
Spencer wasn't the only former BCHS student to speak up in 2020. His petition sparked others to find their voice as well.
I had seen that some students, and they former students, they were a lot younger than me, but that they were doing a petition, and I was like, I'm going to sign this petition. And then I thought, do people really know why they should sign this petition? Do they understand why this is important? And I really felt like for a lot of people, they're just ignorant of it.
This is Bethany Bowling, who graduated from Boone County in 1998.
And just like I was ignorant in high school, I was a lady rebel. What does that even mean? But I had a lot of pride in that as a basketball player. We had a really good girls basketball team, and I had a lot of pride in my school. Sean Alexander was a senior when I was a freshman, and we cheered him on. But when I reflect back on it, I'm embarrassed that I didn't even recognize the rebel was who he was.
Unlike Spencer, who left Florence before coming back, or for that matter, unlike me, who left for good, Bethany has lived her whole life in northern Kentucky. After graduating, she attended Thomas More University in nearby Crestview Hills, where she played basketball while pursuing a degree in biology. Side note, Thomas More's mascot used to be the Rebels as well. It changed to the Blue Rebels in the early 90s before becoming the Saints. It can happen. Bethany went on to get her PhD in biology and education at the University of Cincinnati and is currently serving as the interim dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Northern Kentucky University. Bethany wrote an op-ed for the Lexington Herald-Leader entitled, "It's Time to Change the Rebel Mascot at Boone County High School," on August 11th, 2020, in response to Spencer's petition.
One of the compelling things for me, and I did mention this in the article as well, is how we educate our kids about slavery in this region. And, I shared it on Facebook. There was very little response. Did get an email or two that was, they felt like they were from older individuals, kind of countering some of the arguments I made around the purpose of the Civil War, which I think is a kind of, it's their classic response.
It wasn't about slaves, it was about states' rights.
Exactly. Sure it was. So I felt like that was, and I don't even think I responded to them. But I think a lot of it was let's just ignore her and this will go away.
Don't go away or the racists win. We'll be right back after a short ad break.
When I did my petition, I got it too.
Yeah. Oh, what did they say to you? I mean, just for the listeners, this is like a very cute, like blonde-haired, blue-eyed sort of like guy. Like, what did you hear about it?
So the first thing that I remember is posting in the Boone County Neighbors Facebook page. Ooh. And I just left it there and said, hey, I'm trying to change this. I'm sure, many of you feel differently, but, if you'd like to sign, here it is. And the post was taken down within an hour. But some of the comments that I read in that time were about how I must be this New York liberal. And, my Facebook at the time was locked down pretty heavily. And I can remember them saying, well, this is a fake profile, even though my name, like if you live in Boone County, you don't know a Zimbro,
Yeah, exactly.
Even as far as some people on there saying how I should be playing in traffic.
Wow.
Some of my dad's family, actually, I think all of his siblings either changed their profile picture or something to Mr. Rebel or, wow. And even one of my aunts posted that she was disgraced and ashamed that her last name was associated with the article that came out in the Inquirer about what I was trying to do.
Wow. I was a Black woman living in New York when I wrote my article. I knew there would be backlash, and I knew I'd be hundreds of miles away from it. For Spencer, this was his home. These were his neighbors. This was his family. Imagine choosing this image of the Confederacy over your own nephew.
I was disappointed, but I wasn't really surprised.
Yeah.
People want to cling to what they know and to history. And, these are people that haven't moved away from the area in, 60 years.
Yeah.
And when you don't see other opinions or go away to school or travel the world in any capacity, it's very easy to keep your own narrow view of what your world is.
Absolutely. Leaving this place, leaving Florence, leaving Boone County, going to college, or going anywhere, it gives people a broader perspective. The pushback that Spencer got, the pushback that I got, was largely from people that viewed us as outsiders for the simple act of leaving. There's this idea that if you never leave, that your love of a place is bigger or truer. But the reality is that when you leave, you see the world in different ways. You see yourself in different ways. You grow, you learn, and sometimes you come back home. But when you do, you want to do it authentically. Were you out in high school or not really?
To a very select few people.
Yeah, look, we've been out of school for a minute, but especially when you were there, were there any other kids who were out that you knew of?
Very few. Very few. Being in college and learning about yourself, the other thing that you learn about that is the intersectionality of all of these issues too.
I didn't know I was queer then.
Fair.
No idea.
Away from Florence, Jenna got married, and she and her wife adopted a son, and thoughts turned to moving closer to family, to moving back to Florence.
I think there's some sort of conservative backlash going on across both with anti-racism efforts and with LGBTQ plus rights.
We met Jenna in that huddled group of progressives outside the school board meeting where parents were voicing concerns about the implementation of SB 150. And I can't help but think of all of our struggles as the same struggle, to reckon with history, to call out aggressions, to show people in charge that they can come join the movement towards equality. If they can ignore a few chicken shit comments on Facebook, and I guess ignore the strong feelings of the family who created Mr. Rebel.
The person who was Mr. Rebel in the costume was a great supporter of the athletics and was a very caring person. And
this is an adult, not a student?
As an adult, yeah.
Is it possible that this is H.B. Deathridge?
Yes.
Okay. So he's a big supporter of Boone.
Yeah.
His wife has been rebutting a lot of our articles. I wrote this op-ed in 2015. Yours came out in 2020. She is always the first to be like, it couldn't possibly be racist. My husband, and she refers to him as Mr. Rebel, like he's the guy, purposely brought this mascot. So can you tell us a little bit about what you remember about him?
He did not work for the school. He's a local businessman. He was very supportive. He actually announced the girls' basketball games. He knew us. He supported us. You know, when we won the regional tournament, which meant we're going to state, which is a big deal for folks in Kentucky. He had t-shirts made for us that we were going to get. He was counting on us winning, like spending money counting on us winning. Wow. And not even like, you know, I might have to throw these shirts in the garbage if they don't win, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like he really cared about us as student athletes. He wanted to support the program. I am thinking like it's a caricature for him. It was like a character and it wasn't, and they were incredibly good people. His wife was a teacher at the school and very dedicated to students. And so it is a real juxtaposition.
A little more of Judy Dethridge's open letter rebuttal to my article. When questions arose in the 1990s about the Rebel nickname, Mr. Rebel researched it and found that the first graduating class in 1955 chose the name Rebels because of the James Dean movie, Rebel Without a Cause. The name is sanctioned by the Civil Rights Office. We have the letter from them framed and hanging in our home. Yes, there's Rebel Without a Cause again. Yes, she calls her own husband Mr. Rebel. Yes, she's offhandedly admitting that there have been questions about the Rebel name dating all the way back to the 90s. And no, we have no idea what civil rights office she's mentioning. Trust me, we've looked. Here's the last part of that letter. I never witnessed any of the false allegations Hughes represents in all my years as a student or teacher. Rebel Pride t-shirts were worn in support of our school, not in support of the Confederacy. To imply that this was such a reference is beyond ludicrous. The assumptions she makes about fellow students, both then and now, are totally without any basis in fact. For the Inquirer to publish such a racist article does nothing to create diversity and peace, but rather fosters more division and controversy. Racism works both ways. Judy Dethridge, Villa Hills. By the way, Villa Hills is an area that was owned by a few large slaveholder families and the site of many escaping slaves crossing the river to Ohio. Concentrated terror over there. Just mentioning it. Anyway, we reached out repeatedly to Judy Dethridge to talk with her and HB about all of this. She refused, rehashing the same old story about James Dean, and ended by saying, quote, Boone County High School no longer uses Mr. Rebel, so there is nothing to contest and no reason to bring it up again.
And I can remember in 2015, just almost wanting to write into the paper and just correct her.
Yeah.
You know, when you want to just be your teacher and you just want to like proof it and ask for evidence and everything.
Yes.
And I just like wanted to go to town on her article with a red pen. My goodness. But I actually had her as a long-term sub when I was in like computer class at Boone. Yeah. And I was just so astounded by what she was saying back to you. And clearly just wholesale invalidating your experience because she didn't see it.
Right. Look through the yearbooks in the 1990s, and Mr. Rebel is everywhere. He's on the cover, he's posing with everyone. One year, a drawing of Mr. Rebel accompanies the numbers on every single page. Mr. Rebel is ubiquitous. He is Boone County High. Mr. Rebel retires in 2001, and there's a full spread saying goodbye to him in the 2002 yearbook, complete with a picture of H.B. Dethridge posing in the Mr. Rebel costume without the head, his own tiny mustache face dwarfed by Mr. Rebel's oversized gray coat. But Mr. Rebel doesn't stay down for long. He's back in 2005, having traded in his coat for a basketball jersey. Piecing together clues from the yearbooks, it seems H.B. is no longer in the suit. Now, students get the chance to wear the big foam Confederate head at pep rallies and football games. Mr. Rebel stays the face of Boone County High School for another dozen years. He's on shirts, he's on walls, he's on the gym floor, until in 2017, finally, someone takes a stand. When the principal at the time, Tim Schlottman, announces that Mr. Rebel is going away for good.
We are a very diverse student community, and I didn't feel the image of Mr. Rebel coincided with our global community.
The change took place quietly last summer, not under pressure. Tim Schlottman says it was not an issue at Boone County, but the Rebel image no longer fit. He says the Rebel name still does.
There's been no discussion of changing the name.
To his credit, Principal Schlottman did work to change some of it. And I think he probably got to the point where he was able to get rid of the image, but any more than that, and the community would have just erupted.
We reached out multiple times to Tim Schlottman and his daughters, who I'm friends with on Facebook. We finally reached him over text, where he graciously declined to be interviewed for this podcast, explaining that he was retired from BCHS and is, quote, no longer involved in this issue.
I actually wrote a letter to the editor to the Cincinnati Enquirer supporting getting rid of him because, well, I felt a little loyalty to Principal Schlotman because he was my track coach in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And I've not talked to him since I've retired, but I still feel somewhat of a large appreciation for him. Yeah. So I wrote a letter, and then I encouraged my friends from high school that I'm still in touch with, like, hey, just send him an email, like, tell him he's doing the right thing. Like, this is good. Because there was definitely some backlash.
Those who want to keep the Rebel are very comfortable making their voices heard. It's a uniform demographic. The people who want it to change and can be vocal, like Spencer, Jenna, and Bethany, are all white. It's people like me and people who look like me who have to think about their safety in a place like Boone.
Black on black? With a black kid in the picture?
Back in the Boone County yearbook from 1990, just 2 years before they finally stopped flying the Confederate flag, there's a stark reminder of just how white the student body was at the time. The 2 black seniors in the entire graduating class got their own little yearbook article.
What did these 2 say about their high school experience? Deborah, who came to Boone as a junior, said, although I felt out of place at first, I've met friends and everybody's been friendly. She was pleased that her American history teacher had dealt with black history in class. Dante felt there had been times he was the center of attention just because he was black. He said, white people have stereotypes about blacks. Like, if you're black, you're good at sports, and that's not necessarily true. He wished that white students understood blacks and black culture better. Even though they were a small part of the class in numbers, Deborah and Dante added a lot to make the class of 1990 a memorable one. 2 out of 330. And they... Oh my God, they interviewed them though. And the segment is called Black on Black. I can't take it. That's 1990. They knew what they were saying. That is stunning.
The demographics of Boone County High School have changed dramatically since the 90s. And those changes are what led Tim Schlotman to finally do away with Mr. Rebel in 2017. And they're what leads Spencer Zimbrot to launch his petition in 2020.
Yeah. At the time that I was doing that petition, I think it was like 25% of the school was non-white.
Yeah.
So now we're looking at 1 in 4 students who are dealing with this racist imagery.
Yeah.
And that's significant. Mm-hmm. And you think about how that affects learning outcomes and how that affects the psyche of the student. Mm-hmm. It's reprehensible.
So Spencer set up a petition to do right by these kids, to finally get rid of the Rebel's name. When we return, Spencer takes his petition to the school. Rebel Spirit will be right back. Spencer got almost 2,000 signatures to present to the school. Huge. Also, the top comment with 7 hearts is this, quote, the mascot was goofy and Kentucky was neutral in the Civil War. So as an institute of learning, it's actually important to get the history of the state right. Get rid of the nickname. Boone County Biscuits is great and celebrates Southern heritage. Oh wait, that was me. Yeah, I thought biscuits was a good idea, even during a global pandemic and social uprising. And yes, I'd completely forgotten I'd written that until Spencer brought it up. Anyway, armed with his signatures, Spencer presented his petition at the public comment section of Boone County's School-Based Decision-Making Council.
I just remember going in and seeing familiar faces. I remember some of my teachers there and, oh, it's so good to see you, So instantly I felt a little bit more comfortable. Mm-hmm. But I also remember that kind of making it harder because, when you're angry and you're doing all this petitioning and stuff, you're thinking, I'm going to go in and I'm going to make all these demands. Yeah. And then you get there and you're like, so I have an idea.
Yeah, like you forget that there is like a respect there that you have for each other.
And I just remember trying to give the most succinct rundown of all this information I had gathered and written in about 2.5 minutes. And I think I still had some time to spare because I just talked so fast.
Yeah.
And I just remember after I did it, they were just like, okay, thank you. You can leave because the comment, that period public comment portion is over. And I was like, okay, bye.
Spencer never heard anything back. For Spencer, that was it. He'd tried, and it was time to move on. He had a whole life to lead and had burned enough bridges. And that's exactly what everyone was counting on. Page through the yearbooks, and you can see the half measures enacted, the moments where someone cared enough to try, and the moments where more people didn't care enough to make anything stick. That's still happening today. When we came to Florence, we reached out to the school board. We reached out to the journalism teacher at Boone County High. We reached out to the principal, who was an art teacher when I was there. And what we got was worse than no response. We got the runaround. The board told us to talk to the school. The school told us to talk to the board. Emails sent to one person would be shot down by someone else entirely, with everyone CC'd. Finally, Barbara Brady. You remember her. She sent my number without asking my permission to a district parent who was young and black. She was Miss Juneteenth, she explained to me repeatedly, and willing, I guess, to try and explain to me why I was wrong about all of this. It did not go well. So you can't tell me who I haven't spoken to? My intention with this podcast is to change the mascot. Who have I not spoken to? We've interviewed, but we haven't heard a single metric. I am pulling teeth right now. You are honestly the only person who is dying on this hill. About that at all. Like, and why is that? Why is that? No, I heard you, but why? I talked with her for over 2 hours across 2 different days. None of it on the record. Afterwards, my producer and I were left completely perplexed as to why we were put in touch and what the district had hoped would come of it.
So there's just a lot to unpack, and I'm like, something here just isn't passing the smell test. Like, I don't know.
I still don't know what the intention was here.
Right.
Is it a warning?
I never even got to ask about the process for these things, where they sort of are with it. Like,
there are meetings happening.
Mm-hmm.
It is wild to me how talking about a school mascot has led to so much off the record.
The intention of this podcast was not to discredit this person, but I'm like, if this is the black person they feel comfortable putting in front of anyone with an inquiry, and they're not vetting it, that's crazy.
While it's still unclear what it all meant, one thing that was perfectly clear is that making change happen in Florence is an uphill battle.
If I had to go back in time to 2020 and redo that whole process, I think the first thing that I would have done differently is start a dialogue. I've grown since then.
Yeah, same.
And it's hard, when you're really that angry to do anything except lash out.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to do anything differently. You have to go to several site-based council meetings.
Yeah.
You have to make it a prolonged effort. And I thought that I was just going to magically, slap a petition in his face and suddenly, we should change.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about change in the abstract. We're talking about how change really happens. It's not some lone hero swooping in to save the day. Real change, the kind that sticks, comes from us banding together, forming a coalition of folks who give a damn. Now we gotta roll up our sleeves and get to work. Together. Sure, there will be doubters. There will be folks who will say it can't be done, that we're wasting our time. But you know what? Yearbooks don't just tell the stories of a class or of an era. They tell our own stories too. Page through the 2005 Boone County High School yearbook, and there I am, staring out from my senior picture, looking impossibly young. There I am, posing on the gym bleachers, Mr. Rebel on the wall looming over us, with the forensics team, the concert choir, and yes, the yearbook staff. Looking over the looping cursive notes today, nearly 20 years later, some are laugh out loud funny, some are heartbreaking. All of them transport me back to when I was leaving BCHS, getting ready to embark on a life that led me away from Florence until now. It's brought me back. And in the yearbook, near the end, there's one note that stands out among the rest. 2 words. Never change. Looking at the girl I was then and the woman I am now, I haven't. But looking at decades of yearbooks in one sitting, it's clear how much at BCHS has. And now, it's time for the Boone County Rebels to change too. Rebel Spirit is a production of Ninth Planet Audio in association with iHeart Podcasts. Reporting and writing by me, Akilah Hughes. I'm also an executive producer and the host. Produced by Dan Sinker. Edited by Josie Azam. Our assistant editor is Jennifer Dean. Music composed by Charlie Sun. Sound design and mixing by Josie Azam. Our theme song is All the Things I Couldn't Say, performed by Busty and the Bass, courtesy of Arts and Crafts Productions, Inc. Our production coordinator is Kyle Hinton. Our clearance coordinator is Anna Sonnenschein. Production accounting by Dilpreet Singh. Additional research support from Janice Dillard. Executive producers for Ninth Planet Audio are Elizabeth Bakewit and Jimmy Miller. Special thanks to Jay Becker and the whole team at BLDG, the Florence Yalls, Amber Hoffman, Hillary Delaney, and Leslie Chambers. If you have a racist mascot at your high school, or are an alumni of a high school with a racist mascot and want to share your own experience, please email us at rebelspiritpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.